thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been a wonderful conference. We've had so much input, and I know we are getting towards the last days. It takes the last bits of energy. So we are very grateful. I'm very grateful that you took the time, you make the time to be with us to discuss this really important topic of responsible battery recycling and raw materials supply chains, bringing together regulatory bodies and market players to see the way forward with used lead-acid batteries. Let's begin. May I call Mr. Andreas Manhart from Öko Institute to give us our first presentation and lead us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. So good morning, everybody. So everybody who's now interested to hear something about lithium-ion battery recycling, we have to disappoint you. We talk about lead-acid batteries. It's not the most sexy type of batteries in nowadays, but in terms of volumes out in the world, it's still, and it will continue to be, the far dominating battery type. It will also continue to be by far the most dominating battery type in terms of raw material reuse, recycling, and by far the most relevant battery type when it comes to potential environmental human health impacts when not managed properly. So we focus on the not so sexy battery type, but in terms of importance, a quite relevant one. What are the developments? I think you all know it. We have in the global south today, we focus particularly on Africa, but I think this is relevant for a lot of emerging economies, and we particularly focus on Ghana. So this is a bit universal, but the pictures you see here are mostly from various African countries. Infrastructure development, urbanization, growing transport needs, changing consumption patterns, subsequently leading to growing waste and secondary raw material volumes. We have industry in these countries. A lot of industry demanding secondary raw materials, but compared to more developed economies, the bandwidth of secondary raw material demand is much lower. So most countries in Africa, the primary demand for secondary metals are for steel raw materials. And this basically leads to a situation that other secondary raw materials are predominantly exported because there is no industrial demand or very limited. You know it from the US discussion, copper, aluminum, printed circuit boards are shipped. Lead-acid batteries are also for export, but most of them are recycled locally before the raw materials are exported. There are, of course, exports of the batteries, but the business model predominantly existing at the moment in many countries is recycling in the countries. And this is how recycling looks. We very often think, oh, recycling in Africa is always the informal sector. No, it's not when we talk about lead-acid batteries. Most recycling takes place in large industrial facilities. This is a facility in Nigeria. It's not the informal sector, obviously. What you see on top of it, the clouds, this is the problem. It's not just a cloud or some smoke. This is lead dust emitting from the plant. It will settle in the surroundings in a diameter of 2.5 kilometers, and it's highly toxic. And this is actually the problem we have to face. We have industrial investments, we have recycling, but not up to a standard that we would like to see. Of course, there is a supply chain. There is the informal sector. And this, again, is a study from Nigeria, but it's very similar to many other countries. We actually have informal players going around collecting batteries, selling them to traders, scrap dealers, and they again pass them on to others. But in the core, the battery breaker, industrial ULAB recyclers, ULAB stands for used lead-acid batteries. And in some countries, not in Ghana, but in some countries, we also have lead-acid battery production companies, but not on a large scale. There are some few in Africa, but most of the lead is exported. So the bulk of the recycling activity itself is controlled by an industrial formalized sector. There are, of course, also pockets of small-scale recycling. We'll come to this, but there is a strong trend to investments in industrial recycling. This is also a classical example, again, Nigeria. You see here in the middle a lead smelter. It's actually the lead smelter I just shown in the picture. It was built in a time where this place was still quite rural. It was the outskirt of a big city, but the city was growing. So now it's in a densely populated area. You see other industries, you see residential areas, you see two schools, just less than a kilometer, half a kilometer away. And this has tremendous consequences. When we have the lead dust settling in these environments, we have huge consequences for human health. And this is the reason why we already facing a number of scandals. And these are just some coverage of the scandals we are aware of in the African context. In the global context, it's much more. You see this in the middle, dying in installments, a scandal from Nigeria, which had a fallout actually on Germany because one of these plants who was highly polluting, it came out, the journalists found out that all of the secondary raw material was actually shipped to Germany. So in our supply chain discussion, there was also a scandal in the German media, which alerted the European lead and secondary raw materials scene. To the right, you see a demonstration, a civil society demonstration in Kenya, the neighbors of such a plant who found out it severely impacts their livelihoods, and which basically led to the shutdown of one plant. You also see a piece of Senegal. Senegal has similar issues, and the deadly business, a small study. We were also involved. We conducted together with a number of NGOs in Africa. The Toxic Truth is a publication published by UNICEF in Pure Earth. It basically tells us that it is estimated that 1/3 of every child in the world has elevated blood lead levels. This is not only due to ULAB recycling, but it's one factor. And it's basically a quite devastating figure, because being exposed to lead in your childhood age means that you most likely will never live up to the full intellectual potential. You basically lose a generation. The brain, it impacts brain development with permanent consequences. There is also a UNEP resolution from 2017 saying that this is an issue every UN member country should take care of, that this is something to take very seriously. What's the reason for pollution? And of course, there are hundreds of technical reasons, but let's focus on the economic reasons. To the left, sorry, too quick, to the left. Sorry, technology fails me. We can causally differentiate recycling in 3 main types. To the left, you see backyard recycling. This is still existing, but it's actually extremely inefficient. These people lose 40 to 50% of the lead commodity. And this is actually why when industrial smelters come in, they can take over the recycling activities. They're much more efficient. So in the middle, you see low standard industrial smelting. They can recover roughly 90% of the lead. They bring in investments, they set up the facilities, and they're so much more efficient that the informal people will sooner or later realize that it's more efficient to sell the batteries to these smelters, and they make more money. This is in the first place quite good news, because we centralize the problem and we can regulate, we can control the problem. But the bad news is, and this is to the right, high standard industrial smelting is certainly possible. You can do these processes without significant impacts on human health. And the efficiency also increases, but not much anymore. So you can recover 98% of the lead, but the investment costs and the running costs are tremendously higher. And we talk about environments where the scrap dealers want to sell their batteries to the highest bidder. They're informal people, they want to earn money. They have mobile phones and they check the offers. And of course, they sell to the highest bidder. And the highest bidder are the people in the middle, those who bring in facilities but do not really care for the emission profiles, do not really care for health and safety. And this is why in unregulated markets, we at the moment see a tremendous shift towards low standard industrial smelting. Informal sector smelting is reducing significantly, but we still struggle getting high standard investments in the countries. Economic consequences. This is an old study, and I don't really know about the figures, but it tells us that the consequences from childhood lead exposures are tremendous. I really don't know the figures, but this study says that Ghana alone loses 4.5% of its GDP. And it goes back to this childhood lead exposure issue, that basically you have a generation, or those who have been exposed to lead will have lifelong impacts on their intellectual capacities. And this is actually what causes most GDP losses. This is not only lead acid battery recycling, there are also other factors of lead exposure, but it's a major one. This is a recent study, and I think this is good news. When we look at Africa, also other countries, the burden of pollution on the population is significantly decreasing. So the average population in Africa is less exposed to pollutants as they were a generation ago, mostly due to the shift to cleaner forms of energy. So replacing domestic use of charcoal, firewood, candles, but this came with a cost, more e-waste, more batteries. And this same study said that urban air pollution and the consequences of unsound recycling activities, also lead acid batteries, has a detrimental effect on this development. So this is also a reason why of course, we have to follow this path of clean energy, but it has a consequence. It has a risk we should address. I don't say we have to stop electrification. In turn, we have to boost it, but we have to take care we don't create further burden. This is the situation in Africa. Ghana is marked because this today is a very strong Ghana focus. I have to say the light gray areas, we just don't know have the data. We know there are also lead smelters, but what we see is that in all countries where we have data, we have industrial lead smelters. Nigeria with 10, probably more, is leading. It's a very big economy. Ghana with 3 of such smelters, it's also quite large. Each of these smelter has an annual throughput of 10,000 to 20,000 tons of secondary raw materials. So tin, lead, antimony. So this is not small scale. This is also in terms of a world market situation, quite relevant. Now it comes to Ghana, and I would hand over to my colleague, Samson Atemo, because he's know much more about the situation in Ghana. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me just be sure that, okay. Thank you very much, Andreas, for this brilliant presentation. Now we are faced with an insatiable demand for lead in both Africa and then the West and other parts of the world. These demands, as Andreas has highlighted, has consequences for those of us who live in the peripheries, producing raw materials that are needed for the so-called industrialization of the international system. We see the good and the worst practices of lead smelting in our countries. And as Andreas mentioned, there are 3 of them. 2 of them have very, very polluting technology that exposes everybody to pollution. Recent studies by Pure Earth together with UNICEF on blood lead levels in Ghana showed highly, highly elevated levels of lead in children in areas close to these plants. For the levels are so high that it is scary to publicly publish some of the individual results to the global community. And these severely elevated levels will have to be curtailed at one point or the other so that we can save our children and the population of Ghana from the consequences of elevated levels of lead. This is an existential threat, and there's a need for collective action in solving them. The Sustainable Recycling Industries project in Ghana, together with EPA, organized a workshop in Accra, and that was when the Ghana Health Service, together with its partners, Pure Earth, came to brief us on the results of these results, on the results of the tests that they have conducted across these sites. And I call on all of us in this room here to put our shoulders to the wheel and probably force the lead industry to implement the agenda, the strategy for traceability of raw materials that end up in these big companies. And here I'm referring to all the big companies that use lead, including Clarios, Boliden, etc. You have a big role to play in saving our country. Consequently, the Environmental Protection Agency and the big bosses are here, so I'll not go too much into it, but the executive directors, you see him on the screen in his full enforcement gear, visited 2 of these plants and closed them down. These are non-ferrous metals and Southwest Africa. He went there and closed them down for the environmental consequences of their actions. Is it the last end? What should follow after this closure? Do we go back and relapse into the previous operational phase? This is the point for discussion for all of us who have gathered here to think about the future of raw material security as it relates to the used lead acid battery. Andrea said we are going to disappoint you because we are not going to talk about lithium ions. But looking into the future, if we don't address these problems now, in the next World Resources Forum, we'll be back here to tell you about what your lithium-ion batteries are doing to our children in Ghana. Thank you very much. I hand over to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Andreas and Samson. It's quite sobering to think about, and I'm really grateful that you set the scene in this way. By way of introduction, I'm Fred Ajay, if you meet me in Berlin. If you meet me in Accra, I am Frederick Kwabena Ajay. I grew up in Koforidua in the eastern region, a little bit over the mountain from Accra, about maybe, I don't know, 2 hours drive. I grew up in an area called Zongo, Koforidua Zongo. And when we were kids, we used to play while the adults were working on the recycling or industrial parts. And we used to play around there. And listening to this presentation, I asked myself the question, what have I absorbed in my young years? And what has been the impact on me? I think I'm doing great, but I wonder if I had not been playing around those substances, where would I be instead? So I have a personal stake in this discussion, and I'm really looking forward to have this panel discussion today. So we move on to a high-level discussion, interesting discussions, very vibrant. And so I would call on panelists to help me dissect this issue, to find out what has happened in the past, what's happening today, what's tomorrow. Is it too late for me? Is it possible that we can safeguard the lives of further children, safeguard the employment of further adults? Is it possible to revolutionize this industry, to have some positive impact and see whether the kids of tomorrow will not have better futures than they have now? So without much further ado, I would call on Franziska Weber, our first panelist. Please give her a hand. And in 2 minutes, please tell us who you are, what's happening here, and then take a seat for an interesting discussion. I think we start from here, and then we go there.
I think we start from here, as I'm fully prepared. Thank you.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
So yeah, welcome. Good morning. Well, it's almost a bit later than good morning, and to the online participants as well. My name is Franziska Weber. Thank you for introduction. I have a history in the lead acid battery industry, actually, but today I will represent the Non-Ferrous Metals Association here with my focus on lead, because I'm representing now the platform lead, means all the lead using and producing industry in Germany. So please excuse me already if I have a very narrow focus, maybe not the world focus, but a bit more European focus maybe. But I'll try to zoom out wherever I can. And before I just sit down and be quiet, I need to disagree with Andreas first. Lead acid batteries are not sexy, they're really sexy. I'm going to explain to you later why I do think so.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I look forward to that. Please, in the hot seat. Next up, Mrs. Irene Opoku, please come over. I should wish. In a couple of minutes, please tell us why you're here, who you're with, and what we can expect.
My name is Irene Opoku, and I'm the Acting Director for Environmental Protection Agency, the Greater Accra Regional Office in Tema. And I have a background in human ecology, and I have interest in environmental assessment and audit, compliance monitoring, inspections. And in fact, my region in Ghana is where most of these ULAB facilities are located. And so I'm glad I'm here this morning to have a discussion, which we look forward to ensuring that lead acid battery recycling companies operate sustainably in Ghana. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, right there. Nice. We have, is it okay to, I would like to bring you closer and then I would, yeah. Right, we have a final panelist. He's online, Stefan. Stefan, can you hear us? Stefan?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Nice, that's great. So he's in the cloud. And please, Stefan, give us a couple of minutes, who you are, why you're here, what we can expect from you.
Thanks, Fred. Sorry for my voice. I'm a little bit sore, but I hope that's fine. Stefan Rittler. I'm in the solar off-grid sector for 15 years now, roughly. And today I'm representing Asante Systems, which is a German-based solar system integrator. So we do solar systems all over the world, founded in 2009, and specialized in designing and delivering solar systems worldwide. We mainly work with local partners in the countries which we work in, and we use high-quality products to implement the projects. The implementation of our project is based on a 360-degree service approach. So we start from development, going into implementation, and also doing O&M supports. And that's the part where we actually have added recycling as one of our services to especially recycle lead-acid batteries, because over the last 10, 15 years we've been active. The batteries are now getting into the point of needing recycling, and they're gathering there. Asante Systems is a kind of a partner to developers, operators, financiers, and in the last nearly 15 years we have implemented more than 7,600 systems in 55 countries. We're also board member of the Alliance for Rural Electrification, which is kind of like a bigger board for solar systems and with a special focus also to Africa.
Nice. Thank you so much, Stefan. Looking forward to interesting discussions. And now I take my seat and then we can begin to go into these questions. Yes?
Right.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's get right into it. I think I would go with first names if that's okay.
That's okay.
Okay, good. So my first question is to you, Irene. I just want to know, as I just told everybody, growing up in Zongo and all of this is fine. We forgive ourselves for this. But what's happening now in the space, in your view? What is happening? What is the current status quo? What are the current challenges faced by yourself working as EPA in the sector?
Thank you very much for your question. Currently in Ghana, we have collectors of ULAB lead-acid batteries. We have the transporters, we have those who store the ULAB batteries, and then we have the formal sector, that is those who collect and then recycle. So currently what we have is that we have individuals who go out there to collect the lead-acid batteries and then discharge the assets in drains or anywhere they find themselves. We have the collectors who export parts of the lead-acid batteries and then also drain their assets out anywhere. We have the transporters who also do not transport the ULAB batteries in the right purpose-built facilities. Then we come to the formal sector where EPA, through the EPA Act 490/1994, and then we have the Environmental Assessment Regulations LI 1652. We have the Hazardous Waste Control and Management Act 2016, Act 917. And then we have various laws that we use to regulate the sector. Currently, the operations in these facilities are not up to standard. When I say not up to standard, what I mean is that we have challenges from the receipt of the raw material to the recycled material. There are challenges. And then because the companies that have registered with us and have obtained permits through the writing of environmental impact assessment or environmental impact statements, and the agency has issued environmental permits to them, they are unwilling to commit to the technical guidelines that was developed by SRI. They are unwilling to implement fully what is in the guidelines. I think the guidelines has a lot of information that can help them, but because these facilities are actually in a hurry to produce for their market, they actually do not commit to implementing the required pollution control systems that are required to be implemented. there was a commitment that was signed in 2018 by these companies. And then to date, they are still in the same old status for which they were permitted. And for that reason, we carried out the compliance monitoring, and it was through the compliance monitoring that these companies have been shut down. We have one currently operating, that is Recyclers Ghana, but the two, non-ferrous and then Success Africa, have been closed down for various infractions.
Irene, it's very good that you mentioned that they are in such a hurry to produce for the market, but it's amazing that I think the market is here. So my next question is to the market. What do you care, Francisca, what happens with battery recycling in Ghana? This is my question. What percentage of secondary raw materials do you source from transitioning economies such as Ghana and Nigeria? Because this is, even though we are talking about Ghana, it's very much the same situation within the sub-region. What do you care? What's your locus in this case?
Well, maybe let's start with the personal care. We did, in my former life, when I was still with the industry, we did a project in West Africa, mainly Ghana. Therefore, maybe my focus is a bit too much on Ghana as well. And I've seen those sites, and I've seen those sites you just mentioned. And I'm very happy to hear mostly one of them is really close now, because I was pretty shocked. Because when you come from an industry in Europe or Germany, and you know how much you care about your workers, about health and safety, about every little detail that needs to be reported to make it better, to continuous improvement and so on. And you come to a facility where you can see people in flip-flops, no mask, no protection system on, you know how bad that is for the people working there. So me personally, why do I care? Because I know there are even little things you can do better with not that much money. So you can improve a lot with just knowledge. And let's be honest, it's in the market, and the market, it's a world market now for every raw material. And even if you try to track it down and track it down and track it down more, it's still within the trading companies as well. So you never, and with the metal, it's different to, for example, textiles. For textiles, you can take a sample and you see where it comes from. If you have a metal, you have a different type of raw material. You cannot really understand that from a chemical way where it comes from. So it makes it much more difficult. So therefore, for us, it might not be the big part that comes from, for example, Nigeria or wherever in the big continent Africa, but there might probably, and we know, Andreas mentioned it before, there was production that came or flew into the market in Germany. And therefore we have to care wherever it comes from.
I will come back to you on this question. I have a follow-up to it, but I would like to interact a bit with Stefan. It's a bit like talking to God, isn't it? Stefan, you mentioned during your presentation, that financiers and also developers should consider battery recycling during the planning of solar projects. Just for my understanding, why? Just the question I have on that is, why should they consider this? Why is it important to members in your organization?
Sure. I mean, the main topic, I think, is what Andreas has already presented before, the environmental impact and the impact on human people impacted with the lead there. And from our experience, what we've seen now in the last 15 years is that actually developers and financiers are very much focused on all the steps of creating a project, implementing a project, running a project. But the question is, what is happening if batteries get to the end of life? And that is hardly actually taken into considerations. And that's where then the question comes up, who's paying for it? What is actually happening with it? Is it dumped? Is it put to the informal sector? Are we recycling it properly? And especially for us, where we are kind of coming from the solar sector and we want to improve livelihood, we want to improve, environment, we want a safe environment, we want to improve the the energy access as such, then it is a bit of a difficult one to then actually argue that batteries are not recycled properly and are actually
Interesting.
asset.
I will circle back to you again on this, but Francisca, I'm going to come back to you on this. With new legislation on supply chain due diligence, you have got the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and this. I want to talk money. This is what I wanted, because I know this is what your industry talks. Your language is money. So, what is the impact on local recyclers if improvements do not happen? What is the impact on members of your firm if they are not sourcing responsibly secondary raw materials? What I am after is, what is the money looking like if we don't improve? What's happening?
Well, money is always a big topic. If we go to legislation first, you have a lot of legislation in Europe around lead. It's amazing. I don't want to start counting and telling you what it is all about, but it's really, really controlled. But we all know that we don't live in one country, one city, one continent only. It's more globalized, everything. So for us, of course, it's a resource question. And you've probably all heard that Europe has now, or even more Germany, is thinking about how do we get our resources and where do we get it from? Because we don't have those resources that much. So we need to see with whom in the world we want to work with. And we need to work with. And therefore, for us, it's of course a question for the future. Where do we get the resources from? If you don't have the resources, although I must say, in Europe, most of the producers work in a closed loop system, because you probably know that we have these take back systems. And it's completely closed. You don't find a battery anymore somewhere at the station or next to your house, because it's money. And you don't just leave money thrown on the street. So therefore, we are not so depending on it, but in the end, it's a worldwide market. And yes, we are depending on those resources.
Interesting. That's really wonderful to hear. I want to go on another tangent. I will come to you a little bit, but I want to ask Stefan a question. Based on his presentation, you mentioned that there is a lack of regulation and clear processes. Stefan? Okay, he's there. But Irene mentioned it, and I also know it, Act 917, LI 2250, SRI technical guidelines. The list goes on and on and on with regulations. Stefan, what more do we need, or what is happening? Why is there, in your opinion, a lack of regulation and clear processes? What's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, we're active in a couple of African countries, and I suppose Ghana is on a good path here and is leading the activities. I don't know the regulations in detail, and they're different for other countries as well. But as far as I understand, mainly they're about collecting and pre-treatment of e-waste, or also battery-powered e-waste as such. But I'm not sure if there is actually something for batteries, 12-volt batteries out of cars, or battery banks out of backup systems or telecom systems or solar systems from our side. And then the question is, how are they actually collected? Is there a regulation? And then further going to, like, how are they actually recycled? Do we have a certain process, or is there a certain requirement to what standard they're recycled?
I think this is a good leeway to lean into Irene. Over to you, based on what he said, and also based on these discussions. And I also have the same question for you. We have all of these legislations. We have all of these documents. What is needed? What is needed to bring about that transformative change? Do we need, what measures are needed here? What's happening? What's the implementation gap?
Yeah, so I think that the buyers of these lead acid, I think that there should be some kind of a fund which can help upgrade the equipment that are used in these industries, because you can, when you visit them, you realize that they are actually, some of the equipment they are using are actually outmoded. They need to be upgraded. For instance, they are using the manual instead of a mechanical way of breaking the batteries. And then also we need to also do more training for staff, training for the company operators, because when you visit such facilities, you realize that it's as if They are operating, but they don't know what they're actually doing. And the law, the permits that we issue to them gives them the need to actually be able to do some of the things they are not doing. So I believe that more training is needed. And then the technical guidelines that was prepared by SII and has to be actually enforced. And then I believe also that we need to engage more, because when it comes to the informal sector, for instance, in Ghana, we have the local assemblies also being part of the decision making, and so they should not be left out. I've had instances where on various forums I've had to educate some of the chiefs and then the individuals that we meet, the assemblies, the fiscal planning departments. We have the environmental health departments of the various assemblies, but they don't seem to have enough knowledge in terms of the impact of these lead acid batteries. So I believe that there should be more training, there should be more stakeholder engagement. And then I'm sure when we do that more and continuously train people, I believe that it will go a long way to help improve the sector.
Absolutely. I have a follow-up question to you on this. You mentioned chiefs, you mentioned local assemblies, EPA as a regulator. I think it's important to set the context, as in other parts of the world, you would not mention chiefs when you are talking about an industry problem or an economic activity. However, maybe expand a little bit more on the connection between local assemblies.
Yes,
chiefs,
the reason why I
regulators.
said chiefs was that, when it comes to Ghana, individuals or families own lands. And so what happens is that sometimes the chiefs would sell the lands to a company without recourse to the assembly. And then in most cases, you realize that assemblies do not have the local plans as well. So you have projects being cited in areas where they are close to where communities where these activities impact on. So it's important that the chiefs are brought into the picture. It's important that the chiefs are made aware of the impact of such activities, and for the fact that the assemblies have to also come on board to help the chiefs plan. Families own land, so sometimes they sell the lands before the assembly is aware. And then when it happens that way, and the facilities are not operating according to standards, then you have this projects impacting on the community and the environment as a whole. So that is why the chiefs are very critical in this matter. The local assemblies are very critical, because sometimes when you explain to them informally, they don't seem to understand. So it's good that we go the formal way and engage them before even projects are allowed to take place in the communities in which we find them.
Thank you. And I'm from a country where social constructs, the authority that the family chief or what your father says is so strong, and it's important to recognize this social construct in any measures that we bring on board. Francisca, my next question is this. So you are looking for secondary raw materials. You hear, there's a lot of this in Ghana somewhere. One of your members goes over, tries to get a few tons. What challenges do you encounter? What is going wrong for your members when they're trying to source secondary raw materials from transition economies like ours?
Actually, I'm not sure whether the companies I represent really would go that directly. We know, for example, since what happened in Nigeria was cut out of the supply chain because people were afraid of dealing with those companies. And I think that's maybe the biggest problem. Even though companies would like to interact, transfer knowledge and so on, they're still a bit afraid of doing so, because if it's not the perfect world you find there in a smelter, for example, they're always afraid that an NGO, the press, whoever, is just finger pointing at you and say, you worked with them, but you know perfectly they are not perfect. So why did you work with them? So it's always a bit, we try to interact, but at the same time we are cowards on our end, because we don't just try to get into the partnership and try to improve from both sides. It's not just what we find there, it's as well how we act with our partners in those countries.
Absolutely. Just as a reminder, please questions, there'll be a Q&A opportunity right after this. So please note down your questions. I'm really looking forward to hearing some amazing and interesting questions to push the discussions forward. Right, Stefan, just this is, by the way, because we are dealing with the topic of used lead acid batteries, and because you are in the solar industry, and also because we are talking about an environment with not 100% energy supply all the time. We all know this for Ghana. I wonder, what is the potential do you see for decentralized energy systems in Africa or in Ghana, and what roles do you think lead acid batteries can play? Just a quick one there, I would be happy.
I mean, lead acid batteries have been used in the last decades for rural electrification and electrifying, especially rural areas in Africa. And that's what we have been doing, and what we see that now these batteries are at the end of life and are now waiting for recycling. We have been looking in different other components for reuse, but I'm not sure for lead acid batteries if that is a possibility. We're more looking into then recycling, either in the countries where we've just faced the issue that there is no recycling facility which is up to international standards and providing the means for saving or for reducing the hazardness. And that's where the point is coming in to actually see how are we taking these things forward.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I am interested in your questions to see if anyone has some questions. Please let me know, and let's quickly get this conversation on the road. Any questions, please? Any questions to the panel?
There was one question before from the lady in red, but I think it's gone already, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Then I would go on to say, let's have some final statements. I would start with Francisca.
Well, the finals.
Oh, there is a question.
There's
Yes,
you.
please.
To the lady on the right.
Me?
Yes,
Okay.
please. You said your members, for them to buy raw materials from Nigeria, they are not too comfortable with it. But then there was a reportage that some companies from Europe actually source the materials from second or third party, so how does it still work? I mean, did they know that it's still coming from Nigeria? It's all still coming from this plant, because those materials doesn't end in Nigeria because there's no processing plant. So it still find a way to Europe. And Andrea said it earlier, they are between 10,000 to 20,000 tons that they produce per year. So there's still a way those materials goes to Europe. So how do you deal with it?
Well, I think actually that what I said happened before. So since that happened, supply chains cut, because if I'm not sure if I'm right, because I'm not sure about the recent developments, but if I remember right, but this is maybe something Andreas need to comment. This factory is not supplying anymore to Europe because of the cutouts of the supply chain, but it's of course supplying to somewhere else. So it doesn't really change anything. It just flows into another market, and that's not the solution for it in the end.
Yes, David.
Yeah, I have two questions. One to the EPA official and the other to a co-panelist. To the EPA official, I just want to know how political interference has affected their ability to enforce the laws. And to her colleague, I want to know how they ensure that the secondary materials that they source from Nigeria or other parts of Africa come from people who procure them in environmentally sound and responsible manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I am interested in that question too. Please tell us.
Well, when it comes to enforcement, what the EPA does is that, for the existing industries, they prepare what we call the environmental management plan. And in the environmental management plan, they would outline what their action plans are in terms of particular challenges they are having in their operations. So we actually give them, they actually voluntarily, they give us timelines by which they will be able to comply with whatever that the agency requires of them. And so it's not as if the agency doesn't go ahead and then close facilities. We do. But of course, we give you the timelines through which you should comply with. And after that, so with political or no political interference, the agency is able to close down facilities. So, well, there could be, but I believe that on our own as EPA, we are able to close down facilities when they don't comply with the conditions that we give them, because the law strictly provides that, gives us that avenue or the room to be able to close down facilities or probably shut down the offending activity when it comes to the operations of companies. So we actually do shut down facilities when we've gone beyond what we have allowed them to, do. If they are not able to comply with, depending on the timelines they give us, we are able to do without political interference. Is it okay?
It's okay, but I have a follow-up a little bit. But when you give opportunities to firms to change their operations,
yeah,
and let's say you have firm A who is investing massively in technology, transforming processes. In my view, they are investing, yeah, the profit margins are reduced because they're investing in technology, they're investing in human capital, and you have another firm B that is just kicking the can down the train. When you give such opportunities, is firm A not disadvantaged? Why would you give opportunity for a polluter to keep polluting and say, until such a time, please stop?
You see, the thing is that before the firm becomes what it is, it doesn't just start like that. Because if you look at the companies that have operated in my region, for instance, it didn't start the way it was. Recyclers did not come in like that. They came the same way as the other two companies that have shut down came. And so they were also given the time to relocate from where they were to their current location. So actually, the agency is there not to actually prevent businesses from operating, but we are there to assist as well as to crack the whip when the need arises. So all the companies that I know that have operated within my region did not start with the technologies as you say. It says they started from somewhere before they got to where they are. So we actually give them time. They're supposed to comply, but then in the event where you don't comply after a while, based on your own commitments, then we shut you down.
Absolutely. I do not envy your job at all, balancing development with enforcement. This is obviously not very easy. Do you still remember your question?
Yeah, I was so intensively listening so that I hope I remember the second question.
Perfect.
I think you asked how can we ensure that we get the good material, right? Well, I think it's a cooperation work. We need strong EPAs like we have in Ghana now. That was a development as well. It hasn't been always like this.
Yes.
But if I look back, for example, in Germany, like 30 to 50 years ago, did we have the same kind of industry as clean as we have it now? Probably not. So I agree, it is a path. On the other hand, we see that we have good recyclers, very few, but we already have 1, 2, 3 maybe in Africa that are already working to very high standards. And I think it's very important to protect those ones because, as you said, it's much easier to give a lot of more money if you don't have to invest that much in correct or even better standards. So I think we need to have a very, very powerful cooperation as well with the governance part. And not only in Ghana, but in other countries like Nigeria, for example, as well. So I hope this good vibe can expand from Ghana to other countries. And I know, for example, from the SRI project, other countries are adopting the standard operating procedures for used lead acid batteries. And I think that's a perfect example of how this can develop further and make a cooperation with the industry stronger and more direct.
Thank you so much for this. Do we have any further questions from the audience? Well, without any questions, I would then ask for final statements. And I think we've left Stefan alone for too long. He might be lonely. Stefan, do you have any final statements?
Yeah, of course. I mean,
Nice.
I mean, for us, the interesting point is to kind of like get to a joint solution where we kind of work with with the governments, with the regulatory bodies, then of course with the lead industry, with the suppliers of our batteries, kind of to a solution. I mean, we're now doing this as a kind of a service to ensure that batteries are recycled safely. But in the end, we actually don't see ourselves let's say, in that position. We're not building a company to do battery recycling. We actually want to implement projects on the solar base and to supply electricity to those who are in need. And that's where we actually want to focus to. So we're happy to like collaborate or support or bring in our activities and our knowledge. We actually would want to partner with other solar companies or even other industries. As I said, I don't know, backup industry, telecom, automotive, wherever. And then kind of like bring together the volumes of lead, which is around from the projects, which we know from the projects which our partners have, to have a volume, which is then also making it interesting for recyclers to actually get to international standards, which is a requirement for us. We would not otherwise do the recyclings in the countries. If there is the option to do recycling in Africa, in the countries themselves, that would be our preferred option. We don't want to, I don't know, waste time and money. It's very expensive to bring it to Europe to do the recycling there. So that would be the ideal solution, and that's where we have to work together. We have to have more awareness, probably with the decision makers, with the companies, with the users in the end, the end users. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Stefan. I have a final question for you, Franziska, and this should be your final words as well.
Okay.
I have a procurement background. I'm very interested in your sourcing strategies, and I just wonder, what kind of relationship are you looking to build with local suppliers, if you are at all? What does the future look like in terms of supplier development? What knowledge or technical transfer needs to happen here to make your members feel secure to source from local suppliers in this way?
I don't have a procurement background, but it's what probably I've said before. We need to have the knowledge transfer first. And then I'm not speaking for the companies themselves, but I might imagine that probably then there are bigger chances to source directly and to not to be afraid of any bad image if you source from a certain country that might have had a history in a certain thing. Coming to my final words today, why do I think that lead-acid batteries are still sexy? That's what we started with. I just wanted to answer that question in the end. Maybe we need to remember that lead can be recycled like 100 times. You probably, if you still have a car and you still have a car with a lead-acid battery, by the way, in a Tesla, you do have a lead-acid battery, just to let you know, for safety reasons. You probably might have the lead that already was in your grandpa's car, because it can be recycled like 100 and more times. And therefore, I think lead can be a very sexy thing. It's not only in batteries, it's actually everywhere. In all technologies you see here, you need that. If we talk about solar, Stefan, you do have it in there. You have it in cables, you have it everywhere. So I still think it's a very sexy thing. And if we are technology wide and open, we will have good technologies. And if we tackle now the resources and the good practices, I think we're on a good way and a good partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Irene, my final question to you, and I wrote these questions, and I thought about it from my own personal experiences, now living in Berlin and being exposed to EU legislation and international legislation. And I keep hearing these words of supply chain due diligence, carbon border adjustment mechanism, and all of this. We have to calculate now the emissions. Not just that these resources appear in Hamburg and it goes to the industry, and a new battery comes out and no one knows what were the emissions before, where it came from. There has to be this transparency. And the question that comes to my mind as a Ghanaian is EPA aware that these rules are coming on? What is going to be the impact on local recycling industries? My friends and colleagues who are still working around Koforidua, Zongo, around Some Magazine, what is going to be the impact when suddenly their off-takers are saying, oof, we need now this paper, you need to show all of these steps that you took through. Are you aware as a regulator? Are you supporting local industries to, in the future? And when I say the future, I don't mean in 10 years. I mean, probably in a month or two, it's coming. It's coming really fast.
Quickly.
How aware are you of these legislations, and what support are you giving to local industries to comply?
I think that we are aware of the legislations, and the agency is prepared to cooperate with international bodies. And we believe that with these laws, it will compel the industries, the local industries, to comply with even our local standards, because then once the international bodies are requesting for, I'm using stringent measures to get local producers into their markets, I'm sure this would help EPA in the delivery of its mandate. And I believe that in Ghana, we also have to formalize the informal sector as well. It's something that we should do. And with SRI support, and then with also the Ghana Cleaner Production Center, I believe it will go a long way to help us produce and then produce sustainably.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Francisca. Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everybody, for being part. Please, a big round of applause for everybody. Thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you for joining me for this wonderful conversation. We will likely continue over coffee. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Right. So we move on after these discussions to look at the future, look at tomorrow, look at the road ahead. And for this, I invite again Andreas Manhart and Letitia to take us through the presentation on multi-stakeholder approach for systemic change. Andreas?
Thank you so much. I think it was a highly inspiring debate. It did actually not start today. We had in this similar rounds in the SRI project, together with EPA, with the ministry, with the recyclers, a lot of debates how to continue. And actually what I missed out in my earlier presentation was, and I think this was highlighted as well, in particular by Francesca, there is, despite all problems, there is a certain bandwidth. The bandwidth between differences of plants. All of these pictures, I'm not sure, do you see my slides? I see them, I think you don't. I want to see.
I learned the new German phrase, the demon, an error demon has entered the machine.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the right.
It is happening. I am integrating.
What you see to the left here is a situation. All of these pictures were taken in Africa. We don't name the facilities. We don't name the countries. They were from different countries. To the left, you see a lead-acid battery recycling facility beyond any hope. It's certainly not knowledge that is lacking. The people who know how to recycle lead, they know roughly what they're doing, and they should know that if you have smoke of that kind coming out of your furnace, it's not a lack of knowledge. It's very obvious to people who work with lead that this is extremely dangerous. So to the left, we see a situation, and also this warning, no banana peels should be scattered around, and you should not eat ever in a lead plant. This is a situation where training is not enough. This is beyond what is acceptable. And I actually salute to EPA that they had the courage to shut down 2 of these plants. I think the stick is not necessary. Training is necessary, but it's a capitalistic world. I mean, it's about money. And if people get away with such low standards, I think training alone can't be the answer. To the right, we see a situation which is completely different. It's not an international standard plant, but there is obviously a management that, procured equipment you can work with that is of high standard. There might be not everything perfect, but there is an obvious will to do it properly. Also, the safety rules displayed in this safe facility are correct. These are people you want to work with. You want to take them by the hand and say, oh, let's walk together, the remaining 20%. This is not people we want to sanction hard. It's probably the people where training, where support is fruitful. So from that starting point, we actually have this very generalized situation. I think in many countries, this is the starting point. We have the national policymakers and the regulatory authorities, and we have recyclers, some of them highly polluting, some of them better, probably even some good recyclers. And we have the battery users, of course, also the importers. And normally the first steps, and these were the steps taken in a number of countries, is regulate. Put in rules, regulation, prescriptions, how to recycle, how not, and also how to dispose batteries, probably also EPR regulation. And very often the second step is a project. In Ghana, this was the SRI projects. In other countries, there are also projects doing very similar things. And this is basically giving advice. Giving advice in particular to those recyclers who are in transition, giving them a bit of support, technical support, study tours, and supporting technical guidelines, standard legislative developments. This is what we have done in SRI with Ghana. I think it was a very good time. We moved it a far way. What comes next? And this is a suggestion. We were discussing with a lot of stakeholders in Ghana, and I think it's the first time we jointly actually, EPA, MESTI, and others are presented it to the outside world. We would like to go for a project coalition between the policymakers, the regulatory bodies, and a project coalition entailing the off-takers of raw materials that are bound to source raw materials, such as Germany, with a big, for example, car industry. Every car has a battery. We're an export country, so we are relying on commodity imports, together with those people who bring batteries onto the market, for example, the solar industry, but not only the solar industry, and who control batteries, who really, as Stefan from Asanti said, hey, we have batteries, we want to recycle them properly, but at the moment we don't see any option. And it's beyond our sphere of knowledge and focus to really support them. We are a solar company, we're not a recycler. So we'd like to have such a coalition and basically find a system where we can cut out the worst polluters. Of course, by banning them in terms of not giving them any batteries, not buying from them. But I think the strongest is the regulatory stick, as Ghana has done, saying this is unacceptable, you have to change or you're out of the market. But of course, work with the good performers, make sure they gain access to the world market again. If they do not do so, probably take them by their hand, show them the way how to do so, and also use them as a responsible disposal options, for example, solar batteries. And of course, probably the biggest group in between, yes, also make them part of the cooperation under condition that they implement an improvement pathway and that they can prove to do so. And actually, this is the idea we, some weeks back in Ghana, together with the stakeholders, agreed to follow, together with the ministry, together with EPA. And we also have coalition partners outside of Ghana. Asantis is here, International Lead Association, Eurobat, Battery Council, International Association of Battery Recyclers, and Wirtschaftsvereinigung Metalle. So 4 industry associations controlling quite a significant share of the lead acid battery market. And actually, we made a first step. The common benchmark, the common standard is already existing. This is the SRI developed, but not only SRI developed, standard operating procedures. And at this point, I would hand over to my colleague Lutisha, who will explain you where we are with standard operating procedures, how they were developed, and what this will mean for our initiative.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you very much for staying with us and for making the session very interactive and for all your questions. My presentation, it's on the benefits of ensuring that there is sustainable the sustainable management of U-labs. So that is the benefits. First of all, we want to look at the benefits to, am I going backwards or forward? Sorry, 1 second. Let me just get this right. I think that's going back. So let's move forward. Okay, all right, all right. Okay. So we want to look at what the benefits are for us if we manage sustainably. Lead is a heavy metal. It contaminates, hurts. The scary bit for me is with the meeting with Pure Earth, when they talked about the number of children that were exposed to it. My first concern was that if something is not done immediately, it means that we have compromised a whole generation of children, their ability to learn. They didn't choose it. But just because we wanted to satisfy our needs now, we are prepared to compromise their future. Is it right? Is that what they asked for? Is that what our responsibility is towards them? So one of the first benefits is that our populations are safe. Workers have safe conditions in which to operate in. And so ensuring sustainable management will eliminate as much of the hazards as possible that are associated with the processing of used lead acid batteries. The other thing it does is that it helps government agencies, okay, to enforce, to ensure that facilities operate sustainably and ensure that we are also committed to operating in line with the UNEA resolution, EA3 resolution 9 of resolution 9, that we want to eliminate lead as much as possible from the environment. We want to not expose children. We do not want to expose populations to lead pollution as much as possible. Then for the industries, the SMEs who do the processes, who are in the business, it also provides an even playing field so that we don't have tricks in a hat that we pull out up and when and arbitrarily apply. The technical guidelines provide an even playing field for everybody. I want to say that when the lead factories were closed down, like, why there are 3 of them? Why have you shut down 2? And why is one operating? It's the same business. We are operating in the same area. But the question is, these are the rules. You've been given the opportunity to comply. If you are not complying, we cannot allow you. So there is no debate. So you don't say that because somebody has more leverage or not. So there's an even playing field for everybody to operate because they have access to the same market. They have the same sources. So if they are not paying the price to ensure that they operate sustainably, then we allow them to get away with that. Then it means that we are making the field uneven. People will make profits off the backs of polluting and contaminating other people. Then, for people who use used lead acid batteries, there is also a benefit because now the technical guideline spells out clearly what you should do. If I have lead acid battery that I want to dispose of, this is who should take it. This is how he should take it. This is how it should be transported. This is how it should be handled. If you check and they don't meet those guidelines, then you know that, okay, this person is not meeting it. There's another person who is meeting it to whom I'll give my batteries to. So it provides a means for you to submit and give your batteries away to be managed in a very sound environmental manner. Then, for the non-ferrous industries, the people will ship the ingots, the pastes, and whatever to in Europe, in the West. It provides an opportunity to work with the sources of our raw materials, the suppliers, the people who give us the raw materials that run our industries, that produce our products, to bring sanity, to regulate their operations so that you put pressure on them. Like I was happy when Francisca said with the issue of Nigeria, they were now afraid of buying from them because they knew that they were operating unsustainably. If you know that your product will be rejected, if you don't meet certain guidelines, if you don't meet certain criteria, there's pressure on you to do it right. So for our industry, it's an opportunity to partner with the sources of our raw materials to ensure that they are done sustainably, the environment is protected, populations are protected, And with respect to lead especially, that we do not compromise the future of the next generation for whom we are promoting sustainable development, okay? Then the next steps in the workshop in Accra in August, we got the buy-in of all the stakeholders that we have to work with suppliers, we have to work with recyclers, collectors, transporters, we have to work with the regulator to ensure that the technical guidelines are implemented so that we have lead being processed in our country sustainably. So that has been done. So most of the stakeholders have been brought on board. I am sure that we identified some more and will also bring them also on board. Then what is going to happen is that we are going to carry out assessments in all the lead facilities and set out action plans, implementation plans for their non-conformances, for non-compliances, for them to implement so that gradually we will move and shift towards unsustainable management. Then the other thing we are going to do for this year is also to train in the benchmark assessment tools for all the used lead acid battery recyclers and operators in the sector, including EPA officers and also other sector specialists. Then in 2024, we are looking at the development of improvement plans for the operators in the area, then the review of the plans, and then follow up on agreements. Because this year we are going to get all of them to agree on the actions they want to take, and then we'll go and follow up on the agreements. And then the implementation of the plans will take place. We'll go on and do follow-up assessments to check and monitor to see how well they have put their mouths where their money is, or their money where their mouth is, what they committed to, whether they have done it or not. And then we'll also communicate what we have found there, and then the cycle will begin again to promote the improvement. And I think the key here is continuous improvement. We never stop. We build on the improvements we have made over and over and over again. So we want to move, we want to make this a thing of the past. What is on our left, a thing of the past, and move to what is on our right, that is what it will be. And that's, we want to send the message clear and establish that if you are not prepared to do it well, you will not have space to operate in Ghana. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreas and Letitia. It's been wonderful listening to you to see what the plans are for tomorrow. I just felt to say on behalf of all Zongo children and as a Zongo boy, EPA, please stop these polluting industries. Just stop them. Right. We are very fortunate today. I'm really happy to be in the midst of all of you. But we have Mrs. Lydia Esua, Director, Policy Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation for the Ghanaian Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation. We would invite her to make a closing statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. So indeed, we've been loaded with so much information. And I hope that as we go back home, we have noted the key points by way of follow-up that we'll have to take up. So my final statement, I want to indicate that MESTI and its regulatory agency, which is the EPA, place the end-of-life management of used lead-acid battery very high on the priority list of critical value chain. As seen from the submissions today, it is not only about the quality of secondary raw materials and adhering to regulatory requirements. The lives of people, particularly children, are affected severely by these operations. It is crucial to address these issues in order to protect human life. There's been some transformative change in the sector, but these gains need to be consolidated and measured, such as bringing international and local players to a common platform to facilitate businesses. Obviously, we've come a long way from informal smelting in scrapyards to the current situation, which still requires pull factors from industry and push factors from our regulators. We can thank initiatives such as the technical guidelines developed by EPA with support from SRI, and indeed continue support from SRI and other partners for positive transformation in this sector. Let me say that we are looking forward to having initiatives that bring industry, regulatory bodies, and recyclers closer in the next steps. The collaboration between industry, regulatory bodies, and recyclers help to clearly see the gaps between local recycling and the needs of off-takers, particularly in terms of recycling methodology, supply chain transparency, and due diligence. It is clear that the days of purchasing unknown sources of secondary raw materials from transitioning countries are soon over. It is no longer possible to see local recycling as a national problem because of the linkages that exist between international firms such as the VW Metal, Asantis, and their need to source secondary raw materials from countries such as Ghana. With evolving international legislation, local industry must keep the pace to keep this critical interrelationship. The ability of local recycling firms to keep supplying off-takers will in the future depend on their ability to adhere to local and international regulations. Finally, it is important to have these pull factors to incentivize this positive transformation, but that in no way means that enforcement is ignored. As demonstrated by the EPA, and as we have heard from Dr. Tiomo and also from Irene, EPA in the last few weeks in Ghana cracked the wheel on polluting firms. And we are very certain that moving forward, this will be the norm so that they are able to keep on improving and also adhere to the standards. Thank you for your participation and thank you for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to thank our technical team for making sure that everything went off without a hitch. I would like to thank SRI team, both Ghana, also internationally, for the content and for the good work that they've been doing. Something it's really amazing to work with you every time. And also thank you as well for joining us today to discuss this issue. It's not over. There will be subsequent issues. We will come back and tell you how implementation went, what challenges we faced, and what more we will do. I do not think that this will be solved in 2 years. This is going to take some time. So thank you for coming and looking forward to interacting with you for the rest of the conference and to see you again next year, maybe here. Thank you. Have a nice one.